Hello and welcome to another episode in Things They Don't in Florida. And today we have with us Alessandro Gerosa. The project title, Things They Don't Do in Florida. What they do in Florida is to play golf in Mar del Lago, forbid people to use terminology that has to do with non-binary forms of gender. They also hide classified documents in their basement and so on. This project, it is what I don't do in Florida, namely to take care of people, to think about what we do in the world and maybe what art's job is in the world. And in particular, in relationship to technology, the project that we are coming from today is initiated by the Canadian Art Council and administered by the Crimson Coast Dance with the director Holly. And we will today talk with Alessandro, who has written his PhD at the University of Milan, then had a short stint in Birmingham at the business school there, and now he's back in Milan on home turf, so to say. And I am not particularly familiar with Alessandro's work, but was curious and captured by a talk that I saw by him around his newly published book called Hipster Economy, Taste and Authenticity in Late Modern Capitalism. And although it might not have a direct connection to our project, I thought it was very interesting to have a conversation around not least authenticity, but also the whole for how forms of hipster economy or hipster identities also infiltrate, if you like, or has repercussions and reverberations into the art world and how we understand individuality, subjectivity, and perhaps also a shift in regard to how we consuming not necessarily objects or products, but consuming experience and how these experiences then are generated. But perhaps we can start. So first of all, welcome, Alessandro.
Welcome. Thank you. I mean, this from your introduction, it already seems one of the most exciting conversation I'll probably have around my book. So thank you very much for this invitation, Martin.
Excellent. First of all, can you do I know this is a ridiculous question and you have been researching your thing for possibly decades, but can you briefly draft your understanding of hipster economy, as I think that it can be a new term for some of us?
Yeah, no, it's not a ridiculous question. Actually, that's a very hard question for me, but never ask a writer of a book the title of the book.
Indeed.
I often joked about that, and it's true that this book is titled The Hipster Economy, but actually it's not a book about hipsters. No, it's more a book about hipsterism as a sort of mainstream consuming orientation that has become paradigmatic in late modern capitalism. So one of the leading provocation of the book basically is that this idea of hipsterism, as we can generally define it as something, as a consuming orientation based on the idea of having authentic experience and on expressing yourself and having distinctive experiences, personalized and unique experiences of consumption, is what accumulate many of us when we decide to go to a cocktail bar because, there is a mixologist which prepares a special kind of cocktail tailored about you. You can go there and say, okay, today I'm a little bit blue, and he will interact with you preparing your cocktail instead of, I don't know, the usual gin tonic or the usual margarita. Or is when we decide to go to an ethnic restaurant because we know that it is populated by locals that speak a foreign language, or because we know that they have a specific ethics, and so they use all ingredients from local producers. Naturally, this has a clear class dimension. This is especially valid, if with we mean, generally meant middle-class individuals, especially in the global north, but not only, because I also use many examples from global south metropolis in my book. But still, naturally, this has become something much more broader and much more significant than just, you know, the stereotypical hipsters with a hoodie and a lumberjack shirt.
Certainly. Authenticity is something that you approach in your book as sort of hipsters, the hipster movement, and as a how do you say, a striving for an authentic self. But of course, authenticity and the sort of the idea of authenticity as something that is valuable is something that we can also trace back until, especially to the Romantic era. No, for me it was quite new and refreshing to see how you make this sort of binary in between authenticity and alienation, then connecting authenticity to sort of Marxist thought and sort of industrial society. Never mind also detouring with the arts and crafts movement in the UK in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and where William Morris becomes a central character for sure. And I think that you make very important points to Morris, and who I think, from my perspective, has been strongly underestimated, both as a critical thinker and in regard to his work in the art. But so from a perspective of industrial society, and how then consumption is something that of course is homogenized. Say after Second World War, it was crucial to homogenize production and homogenize consumption in order to also figure out a way of rebuilding our nations. But interestingly, so authenticity connects with sort of a leftist position, but something happens, possibly second part of, well, I would say around 1990, maybe 1980. Something happens where authenticity seems to gain other kinds of traction, and it seems to me that rather than being associated with a leftist thought, that it becomes associated with the liberal condition, and maybe even a sort of a right-wing attitude, and where authenticity also loses its address towards community and possibly existence, towards a performative and individualized understanding of authenticity. Can you draft a little bit how you understand authenticity?
No, absolutely. I mean, yes, as you mentioned, you know, I try to build a long-term reconstruction, a longue durée, I call it, a reconstruction of the meaning of authenticity along the centuries, because I think that it's very, very important to try to go beyond, the super short-term analysis that we're seeing of authenticity as something driven by the digital revolution or by, again, etc., and look at it as the dialectics between, authenticity and alienation, as you mentioned, as something that is intrinsic to the development of the industrial society. So it's intrinsic to industrial society from the beginning to today, naturally, always in different forms. What has been particularly significant in the last 50 years, as you anticipated, is that, especially from the 70s, but in a more clear way from the 80s, the idea of authenticity has been more and more commoditized, and appropriated by capitalist avant-gardes first, and then in general from all kind of, capitalist enterprises. I think this shift can be seen quite well if we look at how, the idea of being hip, was related, naturally in the 40s. The hipsters, the original hipsters were, Afro-American counterculture in the America of the 40s, which said, which vindicated the idea of, we can have our style as well, no, mixing issues of aesthetics and of politics together. And then you have, you know, the hips, the beats, the hippies, and then in the 80s, some ways you have the yuppies, no, which are the ways that incarnates this kind of, you know, individualism, ultra forms of individualism, but in a clearly much more neoliberal and corporatized way. No, what I try to argue for in this book is that, like, this is neither a book that says, you know, that the economy of authenticity or the hipster economy is going to save the world or is going to ruin it. No, that authenticity is a hoax, or that authenticity is still, you know, the same revolutionary concept that could have been in the 60s, leading the revolts. No, the idea, what I want to try to put is that still capitalism hasn't, you know, captured, if you want, entirely that idea. So authenticity remain a contested concept that is both at the center, you know, of, yes, it has been well incorporated by neoliberal mindset and neoliberal way of life. For example, I don't know, let's think of also the new kind of neoliberal mysticism, no? How the idea of yoga or of Orientalism, embracing Oriental cultures, has become much, you know, incorporated into super corporate lifestyles. But at the same time, for example, no, the urban hipster economy that I analyzed, the resurgence of craft and artisanal, no, is instead, and the popularity of it also in the lower middle classes, is still a testimony of the fact that the ideal of authenticity still represents something potentially countercultural and a radical concept. Is just a matter of this confusion and this blending of multiple things together. But this is a key feature, if we want, of capitalism in late modern capitalism. Let's think of the ideas of play and how this has been, you know, incorporated by capitalism in the workplace, for example. Let's still look at the corporate and employee work. You know, the idea of realizing workplaces which are play fields, where you have, you know, the ping pong table, the bar at the last floor serving free cocktails for the employees from 5 to 6, and these kind of features. No, and does this mean that naturally the idea of having unalienated work that is also a play or a game then has become useless? No, naturally still has meaning, but everything has become much more contested and blended between the two. That will be my take.
Now, indeed, as you say, the workplace as a place where you're supposed to want to stay, and
Yes.
And obviously beer in the fridge on Friday or whatever hours there are, that is something that you're supposed to want to stay for a couple of hours extra. And I mean, I have been working in the arts for my entire grown-up life, and something that I envy other people is the opportunity to go home. I have never gone home from work, so even all my social relations are potentially work relations. When I go to watch a movie, I'm watching a movie in order to be able to, you know, be versatile in my conversation about it, and whatever, and so on and forth. So indeed, there we have seen, I mean, which is obvious, a sort of a remixing or sort of coming to get fusion of labor and leisure time. And I think, from my perspective, I don't know what you think, but from my perspective, this is strategic from capital to have this merging in respect of it is. Or can I ask you these questions that it was not really part of our protocol, but nevertheless, industrial society and the understanding of the worker as anonymous or interchangeable also offers us the opportunity for labor unions. In the 80s, companies like McKinsey, SAS, and others started to say you get a salary, but you also get stocks in the company as part of your salary, which they is so amazing that I get. But hey, when you have stocks in the company, you're not going to go home and say I need money for my overtime, but it becomes a sort of kind of complexifying relation so that you actually can't alienate yourself from work, or you cannot go home basically. So can one also then think that sort of strategically the hipster and its economies is something that capital has been interested in generating, in regard to that it also proposes a certain kind of inability or impossibility for communalization, or for saying we stand together in regard to labor movements and then strikes and demand for higher salaries, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a mix of the two. No, again, like for sure, like the hipster economy, and okay, with hipster economy here, I'm referring more, to this new wave of, small and independent producers or retailers working, especially in the urban economy, opening this kind of bars, restaurants, business shops, led by, the idea of providing craft and artisanal products and led by a strong ethics. For sure, this kind of phenomenon, like this kind of micro entrepreneurs, are children of neoliberalism, are children of the 80s. So for sure, they are moving with, they are working with, the toolbox that has been provided with them. And so they're working with the idea of still of, opening a business to do this, which could be very different with what could be done previously. At the same time, also here, I agree with you. No, like I agree with you when you say, this has been naturally been strategic. At the same time, this is deeply, if we want, contentious and ambiguous, because again, and this is one of, I think the best, interpreter of the new rise of autonomous work in the second half of the 20th century, at least for Italy, which is Sergio Bologna, which reminds how the new rise of the autonomous workforce was also spearheaded in the 70s by people participating to the revolts of the 60s and the 70s. Because, I mean, autonomous work seemed finally a way to, escape from alienated labor. And actually, you mentioned your work as an artist. I work as an academic, which is very different by some terms, but is also very similar for some other terms. And the fact to never stop working is one of these elements. And like, why do we do this work? I may ask provocatively. Well, because in the end, the balance is under the positive element of the fact of having high degrees of autonomy in determining, your work, in determining what you will do, in the artistic component of it. And so naturally, this is this is also the ambiguity of this, that autonomous work, again, is at the same time, has been highly exploited by capitalism, but at the same time represents for a lot of people a better alternative than still, what David Graeber called, the bullshit jobs, also contemporarily. And this new wave of neocraft entrepreneurs may be interpreted, and I interpret them as a sort of new wave of autonomous work as the one that emerged in the 70s, but naturally in a reaction to the bullshit jobs, to the new white-collar bullshit jobs of the large corporations, naturally in different forms, as always, because time passes. So it's important to recognize the continuities, but it's also very important to understand how different contexts matter.
Absolutely. At some point in the 90s, Alain Badiou mused about tribal tattoos and proposed that in in the complexity of the world, in the globalized capitalism, I feel so confused and lost that. But when I look down on my tribal tattoo on my right arm, then I feel real. I feel authentic. No, and sort of, because there was an incision on my skin. It is undeniably me, so to say. No. Um, do you have an understanding of the hipster the hipster is the kind of understanding of authenticity as also being a form of escapism, or a sense of sort of distanciating oneself from, say, for example, then global conflicts or the suffering of international communities, whatnot?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I absolutely agree. Well, you know, like the urban hipster economy, if we want, can be reduced to especially from the on the consumption side, can be analyzed as a sort of big escapism, because basically it is a deeply urban phenomenon. This kind of neocraft enterprise, you know, are in the middle-sized and large cities in the global north, but also in the global south. And what they do is that, you know, symbolically, they offer an ideal return, temporary, and, you know, return to the countryside for people, for creative and cultural workers, which are actually trapped in the urban environment. No, I worked in the city because I have a creative, a cultural job, or a white collar job, so I can't go abroad, because we know that, you know, to actually go living in the countryside now, in some occasions, have become a new form of privilege, if we want, or is a very radical lifestyle choice, or has become, you know, the form of privilege of, you know, remote workers or super rich people that can just buy a mansion in the countryside and live there. But for other people that are trapped in the urban landscape, these, you know, the neocraft economy represent a way that, at least ideally, I can go and have and experience authentic, typical food products that, you know, that are more genuine and are more tasty because they have a real taste, because they come from the countryside and they're not industrial products from the supermarket. Or I can enjoy an idea of authentic sociality. And naturally, these are all social constructions, okay? We know that they are idealized, but I can enjoy a form of authentic sociality between people, like in an idealized form of a rural community, you know, or a community characterized by more genuine relationships. So there's a lot of escapism in that. It is I think, one of the reasons behind its success. It's because it has represented, you know, one of the pathways in which the urban middle class manages, you know, to find, you know, small, even if fragile, spaces of meaningfulness in the few spare time, in the few leisure time that they have, that they possess.
Do you think that certain people have opportunities to actually experience those things? Like, say, foodies, they can spend the whole fucking weekend on cooking some goulash or whatever. But I think there is also a slightly less privileged class of people that don't have time to be foodies, but they experience being foodies and identifying as foodies by watching YouTube videos.
Yeah. I mean, and this talks about, you know, we haven't touched upon it. And I actually haven't touched too much of the relationship between, you know, the authenticity paradigm and the digital, even in my book, just for, you know, space reasons. But actually, yes, I mean, the explosion of food on YouTube, or, well, also on TV channels now. I don't know about, like, I don't know in other contexts, but in Italy, basically, nowadays, one TV channel out of two is about food. It's about making food, food contestants, etc. No, Master Chef, etc. And also YouTube videos, no, because, yeah, naturally, you know, these digital forms represent, again, an even more fictionalized version of that desire, an even more fragile, you know, and virtual and fictionalized way of kind of engaging with this kind of elements. I see these videos and I plan to do that, even if then I don't have the resources or I don't have the time, maybe because I'm too overworked, but still I looked at all these videos of how I could make authentic dishes at my home. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I think this is very interesting in the sense of I mean, authenticity. Somewhere in the, say, the 60s, early 70s, postmodern and post-structuralist thinkers proposed that obviously it's all fiction. So also when Kant proposes that this is the understanding of time, it is also written in a book. So, and the understanding changes, and there's no grounding to language in the first place. It's all performative, says Derrida in the 1971 or whatever it is. So obviously also authenticity is something that is located in language and therefore only authentic in regard to language. There's actually no prominent opportunity for authenticity. So can one then say that today our interest is it's really not to be authentic, but it is to experience ourselves as authentic. So similarly there, I need to watch the videos to experience myself as a foodie and as authentic as the people that are on the video, but I actually don't need to do it. It is the experience of. When it comes to, I see a shift in food related television or media from a sort of, what's his name? That have this master chef and I should show you how to cook, that it has a lot to do with competition and then telling them how bad they are and having, you know, hysterical ideas about you should burn in hell for having done this souffle or whatever, towards today where it has Gordon Ramsay is his name, no? He is not interesting anymore, but what is interesting is to somehow come along into the kitchen and regard these carrots that are grown somewhere because of somebody's commitment to them. So I think that it's interesting to me to think about it, sort of the relationship or the shift from being authentic to experiencing myself as authentic, and experience myself as authentic, even though I know authenticity is, after all, not an opportunity. But that doesn't matter.
I agree. I mean, like, authenticity has always been expressed as, you know, from its birth, from its birth in the 18th century, in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, etc., as a deeply polemical concept, and something very most well expressed when in opposition rather than, in defining it. What is authenticity? Authenticity is the absence of alienation. If we want, like, we have also this. I mean, even, if you talk about authenticity, you cannot, ignore Sartre, for example. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist who lengthily discussed about authenticity and popularized the term. But even Sartre does not provide actually, a definition of authenticity in positive terms. It's always defined by opposition. Authenticity, and this, I think this expresses very well. I mean, the reason why I like the concept of authenticity, despite its ambiguity and its, very abstract nature, is because it very well represents some way, this aspiration that then I don't know if it is, intrinsic to the human nature, like, for example, Noam Chomsky argued, when debating with Foucault or not. But it expresses something that in the industrial society has been, like really always felt by humans as aspiring to find their own small, partial, contradictory ways of experiencing temporary forms of meaningfulness in the, in the interstices, in the folds of capitalism and of the industrial society more widely. So yeah, I agree. I mean, the idea of being authentic now, it's like, it doesn't make any sense, but still, it's very relevant, I think, that this ideal of, reaching temporary and fragmented forms of authenticity is still at the center of individuals' aspiration in everyday life also today.
A little musing on this. Can one, so politics, and I believe Rancière has posted like this: politics implies to insist on not agreeing. The moment when we agree, then politics turns into management. So however much we consider our opponents correct, we have to come up with a counter argument. But so which implies that politics is all about negotiation. It is not necessarily, it's not about taking a position or insisting on a position, but it is rather about making sure that we negotiate and we negotiate and negotiate. This works fine in the sense of how we understand language. It doesn't matter if politics is authentic. What matters is that it proposes, that it goes on negotiating. Or we could also say politics can under no circumstances be authentic, because exactly it's about maintaining to be in disagreement or dissensus, as Rancière says. Now, however, slightly unorthodox, could one make a binary in between politics and ideology and say that ideology is not politics, but it is exactly what makes politics possible? In other words, ideology carries the opportunity to say, in regard of our ideology, under no circumstances, and in respect of what we think, no way, Jose. So, whereas as Brian Masumi was speaking about this in the early 2000s, saying that we live in a world where where we have lost ideology and politics has become the sort of a little bit of this and a little bit of that, possibly this. Under those circumstances, we cannot not allow for a certain amount of torture, or under these circumstances, we cannot not actually insist on the opportunity of making other people suffer or whatever. So maybe it is problematic that in today's society we have sort of lost sight of ideology. But would you say that there is a connection between a striving towards authenticity and a sense of an ideological organization of life?
Yeah, I mean, or at least, yes, I mean, an ideological, because like values for sure. I mean, a certain ethos, like I discuss about, I argue that, this paradigm of authenticity is an aesthetic paradigm, and aesthetics and ethics, are quite linked from their, heretics between themselves, and for sure, this represents also a new way and a resurgence of, values and ethics being expressed in everyday life. And this idea and this centering around values and ethics is at the center of neocraft entrepreneurs' choice to open one of these businesses. I mean, I found many of the people I interviewed were people with a lot of political experience in their past, which told me, well, you know what, at some point you reach a certain age, maybe now you have a family, you need to pay your bills. And to open this kind of business is the easiest way, the best compromise they could find between, paying the bills and still keeping still doing something good. Making a little bit of a change in the world, promoting a specific food culture, or promoting some values, or making making their shop or their bar a sort of local community center, etc. From the consumption point of view, well, naturally it's a little bit similar. That you go into these places not just for the self-satisfaction point of view, but also because, well, you feel that you're contributing a little bit to something better. And the idea of and I think that to contrast this, the contrast between this and, again, the extreme relativism and loss of the heavily defined ideologies and the ideological belonging is a big factor in it. At the same time, this economy of authenticity in some ways reflect also the fact that fixed ideologies have shattered. Because in these places you find very different people. There is nothing, for example, this kind of consumption and this kind of industries are ultimately intimately connected to the idea of leftism and progressivism. That the fact that the people populating this economy are leftist or progressive people variously meant. But there is nothing, if you want, in the values that they're promoting itself, which is necessary leftist. And indeed, we are seeing some kind of blending in these regards. For example, in Italy, a new government, which is a right-wing, even a far right-wing government, has started to try to intercept this wave, promoting a lot the idea of craftsmanship and the return of craftsmanship. Naturally, not in the same way that the neo-craft entrepreneurs mean, but still there is some overlap. And I mean, why not? In the end, historically speaking, the petit bourgeoisie that composed the backbone of retailers was also the backbone of the right-wing parties. So why shouldn't they do this? So you see, also here, is it a return to values and to ethics? But naturally, I think history never returns back fully. It always, and I know you weren't implying this, naturally, but I mean, always with a new, on the, if you want, on the, yes, on the shutters of the ideological buildings,
No, I think you're pointing to the very
ideological buildings.
You're pointing to a very interesting situation in Sweden, which is my motherland, so to say, or whatever one can call it, where I grew up. Now I'm in Berlin, but anyways, in Sweden, with the far right rise of politics, this has become a concern, because how does craft beer manufacturers that sort of cherish the land speak about the importance of local production, talk about the sort of the no waste production? For example, my brother is a restaurant man, and his restaurant, they have a no waste policy, so they use every fucking thing that they come through the door, whatever. And at the same time, the far right politics have appropriated a lot of the language, however, understanding land, local, in a very, very different way. So can we see that there is a new form of tension, that hipster and hipster economy grew out of a situation which is pre sort of neo-nationalism movements, and now there is a little bit of a weird tension in between that. Does the hipster has the hipster become appropriated by right-wing politics in respect of being sort of an implicit promoter of a politics that they are actually quite strongly against?
Yeah, I mean, like a sociologist, Michele De Souza, an American sociologist, Michele De Souza, coined the term gastronationalism. Like naturally, the matter of food and gastronomy are tightly related to nationalism. And again, when I speak of a paradigm, that authenticity has become a paradigm. No, I specifically mean that it become so widely diffused. And so even if in our mind it's naturally linked to some kind of progressive values, it is not necessarily. And the consequence of it being an actual paradigm is that actually naturally also, right-wing politicians and right-wing people are starting to deeply interact with it. Naturally, how they decline it in different ways. Now, as you said, the fact of local production can clearly become, to defend national production from foreign products. The fact of, of promoting local producers can again become a sort of, exaltation of, the countryside and this, rural myth that have always been very, that the right has always cared a lot about and has always built a lot on to different purposes. The idea of, again, of promoting and valorizing small and independent producers can become, the old kind of corporativism defense by typical of right-wing parties of the entrepreneurs and so on. So yes, there's always a sort of, doppelganger, if we want, of this progressive ideology of the economy of authenticity that right-wing parties are surely trying to exploit. I don't know if then they will manage to, but probably it will become again more and more contested also from this point of view.
I have friends in Bologna, sort of neighborhoods to you, and they, over the last couple of years, they are sort of complaining about the horrifying Italianization of food culture in their city and the influx of endless amount of authentic searching tourism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is part of this trend. Bologna is a city particularly interested in that because, again, it's one of the Italian cities with a stronger food culture and a more, famous food culture. So, but this is a trend observable in every city, basically. So, yeah, absolutely.
No, yes, currently protests in Spain against tourism and how exactly forms of consumption is sort of ruining the cities. I mean, of course, also when you search for an Airbnb in Lisbon, you want the Airbnb to be perfectly international with a Portuguese flair, so to say. No?
Yeah. Cosmopolitan with the cosmopolitan aesthetic, but are rooting in local authenticity,
Yeah. But maybe my cynicism is is a little bit too large today. So can we also see possible forms of political resistance or the possibility for political communalization in those forms of current economies and current tendencies or currencies in contemporary culture?
Yeah, I think absolutely yes. I mean, again, what I try to discuss in my book is, again, like the contrasting tensions in this. And I think that for sure, I mean, every kind of claim that the hipster economy or this new wave of neocraft businesses can be a revolutionary force by themselves is naturally extremely naive. Okay, for sure. I mean, but the point is that any kind of perspective that would imply that, I think, is also, deeply neoliberal in its conception. Meaning that it intends that, there is a solution in some, just these small businesses are the solution. No, I mean, the solution passes from no single force. Solutions, and especially resistance kind of, resistance movements, so that have, to fight back an overwhelming enemy, if we want, with overwhelming forces, can only pass by collective forms of organizing. Then what I think, and I sincerely believe this, is that this hipster economy, neocraft businesses, neocraft enterprises can be a part of wider movements, can be one tile of a wider mosaic and doing their part. I mean, naturally of wider coalitions. I mean, this is naturally, there is no reason why there can't be more networked and collective organizing between different realities. And network and organizing with many of these places host initiatives by local associations, by self-organized groups of people. I mean, then naturally, it's always a matter of conflicts, of conflicts for hegemony. I mean, how this movement will evolve in just a clearly more commercialized wave, when you just, commercialize and commodify these kind of authentic, aesthetic, and these value-driven economies for commercial purposes. Do you put them at services of wider movements and collective movements? Naturally, different actors in the economy of authenticity act in different ways regarding to this. Naturally, there must be for sure, some deeply reflexive, debates and discussions. One overall, the one we mentioned at the beginning of our talk, the class dimension of all of this. Again, for which this can be only a component and cannot be dissolution. But at the same time, again, I found it, I've always believed in a strong distinction, and this derives from my Brodelian faith, by my following Fernand Braudel, the French historian, in a difference between capitalism and market economies. Like market economies of diffused, small-sized businesses can be highly different and can work according to different logics than large-sized capitalist enterprises. And I think they can be part of wider movements. Why shouldn't they? So if they don't actually prioritize profit-making, but they prioritize, values, they prioritize communities, and so on, they can become fundamental infrastructure. And I sincerely think that this is an opportunity. Naturally, it's all a matter of how much this will happen, how much, the power relations at the urban levels will go in one direction or in another one.
Yeah, no, and I mean, there is, of course, then a very strong tension in regard to heterogenized smaller operations in respect, and on the other side, then super size me economies.
Yes.
And of course, then with the tech giants as Amazon and Facebook and so on, as being the sort of the dark force, or whatever one can say. So from my perspective as well, there is with smaller economies of this kind, there is at least the opportunity to a self-determination in regard of what values do I want to practice. And that, I think, is crucial. And also something that maybe doesn't offer itself to be either leftist or liberal, but can it also possibly be an emergence of another kind of political ideological positioning that we might not know where it is, but do we see seeds planted in regard to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that naturally also here, the difficulty, I think, is to see them in the bigger picture, because I think that you can see many of these seeds being planted by many, local realities, but then it's always difficult to notice them when you get your viewpoint, above the level of the neighborhood, or in best cases, above the level of the city. That's the real challenge, naturally. And also, indeed. Yes, and also in terms of how much, that is observable and can reach a level of economies of scale if we want. Like, I think there are many experiences, but at the moment, at least, the real difficulty is in to scale them up at higher level of cooperation and visibility.
And which is then ways of coming together, which doesn't mean that we homogenize business models and administrational technologies, etc., I guess. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I agree with you on this. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, it's a matter of really, and this is an open challenge. I don't have any kind of, easy solution for that, for sure. But then I think that this will be one, of the key challenges if we want.
What for me, what is great with your book, to come to a conclusion here, is perhaps also to see that your book, as you said in the beginning, it's not about hipsters. It is, and what is for me, hipster is oftentimes nowadays understood as something slightly negative. But you bring when I come out of the book, it is with a smile and with a sense of agency. And I find it's very beautiful in the book that it wants me to act. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity.
No, thank you very much. Absolutely. I'm very happy that you gave this feedback, because it was actually my intention, I think, with this book. So it's a very, very nice feedback. If I must add something, if I may add something, just in the end, what we haven't probably mentioned, but my fault to have not mentioned at the beginning, is also that in line with the spirit of giving agency, this book is published in open access. So everyone can just, download it and read it from the publisher website. So there's no need to spend money to actually have a read of it. Apologies for this moment of self-promotion, but again,
no, I think that it's important, but maybe it's not a matter of spending or not spending money, but it is spending money on the right people.
That's true. No, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I agree with you.
Certainly, but because another point that I felt with the book is that it's a book that doesn't tell me small anecdotal stories and doesn't promote you as the writer. So I had a feeling that with your publisher, that they have allowed you to write your book and have not, as I see with so many larger publishing houses, also in the academic or scholarly sector, that they seem to want their authors to also spice it up with some personalities and some sort of adventures in the fucking nature or whatever, in order maybe also to give scholarly or academic writing a bit of authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really thankful to my publishing house for having allowed this. And again, what I tried to do in the book, and I'm happy because your feedback tells me that some way I managed to do it, is to alternate some parts that were more, strictly academic, but also some part that were more, like interacting on, the actual and the practical consequences of this. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think again then to say that it's definitely a rigorous scholarly book, but it is also accessible for somebody who is not acquainted with or
an academic.
You certainly don't name drop in a sense as we know from Heidegger or whatever. So also for a person without scholarly background, it is definitely a book worth reading. And as mentioned, from the perspective of the art sector, the way that you discuss a relationship between alienation and authenticity is highly interesting to think about in regard to our contemporary situation in the art world, for sure, very much so. Because in some or other way, from my perspective, now we are going over times here, but authenticity also implies a certain kind of non-negotiability. So it is something, when I encounter something authentic, whether this is possible or not, but let's for now say, when encountering something authentic, I need to generate a relationship to it, rather than just choosing positions or opinions that is already available. And there, sort of, the authentic talks about something to which, said again, sort of, it necessitates a scrutiny of the self.
Yeah.
And this I find is highly of utmost importance in the society that we live today, for sure. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's a perfect conclusion, I will say.
Yeah.